joining us once again. What up, Nick? How's it going?
I'm doing good, guys. Appreciate you having me back, especially just a few days after UFC 300. Of course, one of the biggest events, of all time, really. And yeah, excited to dive in.
Yeah, it sucks because like we got the all-time high card, and then unfortunately 301
I
isn't gonna
know,
be
I
as
know.
hype at all.
Yeah, when they showed that the 301 lineup on the broadcast, I think they did last weekend. Anyways, it doesn't even compare. But I'm
Yeah.
just thinking like we're getting into some Apex cards now again, and it's like, here we go again because we had our one weekend of high, as you said, and then like everything else that the UFC is putting out is just not a level, events. But hey, it is what it is.
Yeah.
All right, Nick, let's get right into it. Is Alex Pereira the biggest star in UFC right now?
No, he's not. He is a star. He is becoming a star, but he's still not. That. Excuse me. I have a bit of a cold, so I apologize if I cough a little bit. But Alex Pereira is a budding star. He is definitely one of the more popular fighters on the roster, but he's not at that Conor McGregor, John Jones, even Israel Adesanya level. Like he's very close, I think, with Izzy. I think that's kind of where I'd put him in the discussion. But I still think Pereira, despite beating Prohaska, despite beating Jamal Hill over the weekend, I don't think he's quite in that upper echelon yet with Connor and Jones. I think he's pretty clearly a tier behind. But hey, I mean, this is a guy who has been fighting the UFC since November 2021. It hasn't been very long. 8 fights total in the UFC, 12 as a pro MMA fighter. To be at this level already, like he's probably a top 5 to 10 star in the UFC. So to be there already is really, really impressive. And it makes me think the sky is the limit, even though the guy is already 36 years old. So,
Um,
yeah.
was okay, I'm in the minority in this, especially because we've discussed this on the podcast. In your opinion, I'll lay it out for you a little bit here. Was this the right main event? Only because Brazil's next month and Jamal Hill wasn't that big name.
Mhm.
Whereas I'm like, and plus in hindsight, the fight didn't last as long as it did. Dominant performance, but not as long as it is. Was this for giving the context of what was available? I was still leaning Leon Bilal a little bit, but was this the best option? Was this the right main event in your opinion, even in hindsight?
I think it probably was. I think actually more so in hindsight, because I think had this been either a Jamal Hill win or, a decision or kind of just like a not great fight, whatever, however you want to, describe it, I think people would have been reacting afterward like, oh, see, this is why it shouldn't have headlined UFC 300. But to have Alex Pereira go out there and just finish Jamal Hill in the first round, leave no doubt about who the best 205er in the world is right now, I think this was, you know, a star-making win for Alex Pereira. And so in hindsight, especially, I think it was the right main event. Even before the event happened, there just wasn't many options. And so I think Pereira Hill probably was as good as we were going to get. Connor was never going to be ready. It's become apparent that he was just too busy with Roadhouse duties and other things. DDP wasn't ready. He was still recovering from the Strickland fight. John Jones wasn't ready. No one was ready. And so if we're like comparing it to, say, Edwards Blal, which could have happened, I still think Pereira Hill was the bigger fight, and especially in hindsight, because I really don't think, as much as I want Bilal to get the title shot, I can't see that fight with Leon being overly exciting. And so I think Pereira Hill was the right fight, and especially in hindsight.
Yeah, I think my main argument was just because the Brazil card is lackluster. They brought
I
back Jose Aldo from retirement. I'm like, the biggest star in your country isn't fighting in Brazil. That's my only reason why. The main reason. Like I understand
Yeah.
why it happened. They had to sacrifice it, like how Jobin put it into
No, they
those
had to
words.
sacrifice. You
But
cannot have the biggest star not in the main event of UFC
Yeah,
300.
exactly. I feel like we're definitely UFC 301 in Rio on May 4th is definitely paying for this. But when Dana White and the rest of the UFC brass looked at both cards and sort of laid out the possibilities and the different scenarios, what fight do they want to under deliver? 300 or 301? Obviously 301. So I mean, Alexandre Pantoja, he's at least a champion from Brazil. It could be worse. 301's on a great card, but we've seen worse, I suppose. So yeah, I think having Alex Pereira fight at 300 was the no-brainer option, you know, because again, the UFC kind of backed themselves into a wall in the lead up to 300. There was just so few options. They had, Sean O'Malley fighting the month before. He could have been on 300, but yeah, I don't think saving Pereira for 301, given the circumstances, would have made much sense.
Sticking with Alex Pereira here very quickly. You released an article about what's next for the UFC 300 fighters. Obviously, in our opinion, the obvious answer is Magomed Ankalaev in terms of within division. You heard him say, obviously he might not, he's probably not fighting in Brazil, but he did say there's rumblings go up to heavyweight in general, fight Tom Aspinall. And the third option we have here is maybe down the line, if Izzy beats DDP and maybe defends against Strickland, I think that's the overall, I think that's the best option for Pereira and all of UFC in general, because Izzy's the only one that has knocked him out in the UFC. And maybe Izzy goes up, maybe he goes down. I don't know. But in your opinion, how would you rank all these three potential fights in the future from realistic standpoint?
From realistic standpoint, I I would probably put Pereira Ankalaev number one, just because again, like with Pereira staying in his own division, defending the title, I think that's ultimately what he'll do next. Just from a pure chance and odds perspective, fighters generally stay in their own division, and so I think that's more likely than either Izzy moving back up or Pereira going up to heavyweight. It's still not a super likely fight though, just because I don't think the UFC really wants Ankalaev as their light heavyweight champion. He's from Russia. It's tough to book him in fights. And also he's just not the most exciting fighter from a casual fan perspective. And that's not an easy matchup for Pereira either. That might be setting Magomed Ankalaev up for, a title win. And so they might want to avoid that. But ultimately, I think that's probably the more likely option. Pereira at heavyweight is a really fun idea. I just don't know how likely it is, because I guess if anybody at light heavyweight can go up to heavyweight and knock someone out, it's probably Alex Pereira. But putting him up against Tom Aspinall, I think that's just a recipe for a bad loss for Poetan. And so why throw everything he's built up away with one heavyweight fight? I don't think that makes all the sense in the world. As far as the Izzy fight, I still think down the road, Izzy Pereira 3 is one of the biggest fights the UFC can make. I know there isn't like a lot of buzz for it right now. Both guys have gone in completely different directions. Izzy needs to bounce back from the Strickland loss. He's focused on regaining that 185-pound title. But as you said, I mean, if Izzy does beat DDP, maybe defends it, whether it's 2025 or end of that year or whatever the case may be, I still think Pereira Izzy 3 is a huge pay-per-view seller for the UFC. I mean, you just think of the history and the recent, fights they've had in the UFC. And, despite Izzy and Pereira kind of moving on themselves, it sure feels like there's something still there. And a third fight, almost has to happen at some point.
All right, you wrote this in your article in the preview. The people's main event, Max
Yep.
Holloway, Justin Gaethje. I don't think any other fighter's stock rose more than Max Holloway after this weekend. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree. I think Max Holloway, I think this win, like, here's the thing with this situation, and what makes it so interesting is the fact that Max Holloway has been a UFC fighter since whatever it is, 2012. I think he's had X number of fights in the UFC, X number of wins. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. He has records left and right. He's been the featherweight champion. He's defended that title 2 or 3 times. Like, he's already up there as somewhat of an all timer. And for someone to go, but he was never like a superstar. He was never like headlining pay-per-views that were selling millions of buys. He was never a mainstream star. And so for someone as experienced and for such a veteran to have their whole career, like 10 to 12 years of a UFC career, and not really be that huge star that some people like Conor McGregor become. And now I think you can put him in that conversation. I'm not saying, he's a bigger star than Conor or John Jones, but this knockout win went absolutely viral. Like, I've had people that don't give a crap about MMA talk to me about it, and they're not asking me about Alex Pereira. They're asking me about, hey, you saw that last second knockout over the weekend, didn't you? And I just think this win transcends Max Holloway to even greater heights than he was at already. And just from a pure divisional relevancy stakes perspective, I mean, this guy is a top contender at both 45 and 55. Like, there aren't almost any fighters in the UFC that can say they've done that. Jessica Andrade is ranked at both strawweight and women's flyweight, but it's so rare. And Max Holloway is legit like a title contender in the two deepest divisions in the UFC. It's absolutely crazy. I'd expect nothing less from just such a gangster like Max Holloway, to be honest. And yeah, so to answer the question, his stock has skyrocketed. It's cool to see an experienced fighter, a veteran stock go up like this, and I can't wait to see what's next. And
Yeah.
I think it'll probably be Topuria, but either
It,
way, I can't wait.
yeah, it surprised me that first of all he's 32 years old, so he's been doing this at age 20 since in the UFC, and then people don't realize that like lately it's just the Volkanovski fight that really was the biggest blip because the first, second Volk fights were kind of close, right? One of them was a split decision loss, and the last Volkanovski fight, obviously he got dominated. So it was just like this is my you better remember me moment. You must have forgot about me moment because
Yep,
I'm a huge Justin Gaethje fan, so it sucks for me to see him go
sure.
not down like that. But you calling a guy that Gaethje's caliber who can knock you out, who rocked him in the fourth round, especially when you're up 4-1, and like they should retire the belt at this point because like there's nothing more BMF about that essentially.
Yeah, you're bang on about that. I mean, I think it was Luke Thomas who was talking about this on Morning Combat the other day, but he was saying how, you know, this win by Holloway legitimizes the BMF title in a way that Jorge Masvidal didn't, even in a way that Justin Gaethje didn't. Like, no one like the BMF title has always been a gimmick, and it still is. Like, it's not a belt that means anything really in terms of, oh, this guy is the best fighter in the division, or this guy is that. But like now in some ways, like not everybody would do what Max Holloway did on Saturday. Like almost nobody would. Who, as you said, like who is up, 3 rounds to one, 4 rounds to nothing. I think one judge had it 2-2, but Max was clearly in control, regardless of the scorecards. And who does that and with 10 seconds left, points at the ground and just risks it all? Like he literally did. Justin Gaethje had as much of a chance of catching Max as Max did Gaethje. And so, yeah, like this is a whole new definition of BMF, and no one deserves it more. Like honestly, like Jorge Masvidal, Gaethje, whatever, like they're great fighters. They're BMFs too. But man, Max Holloway, he I think like he's made the BMF title an actual thing now. I think people are gonna want to see him defend it, whether it's maybe against Charles Oliveira or Poirier or someone else. This is a belt that people actually are interested in now, and I don't really think you could say that before.
Um, to close it off on this very quickly, is this okay? Definitely the coldest moment in my opinion, when ever since I've been watching UFC. Is this the greatest knockout you witnessed? Because the only one I could think of, and I might give the edge to, was that Leon head kick on Kamaru Usman, because only because he was down 4-1 and that until he got the knockout. So is this the
Yeah.
greatest knockout in your opinion, or is it still Leon or someone else that comes in your mind?
I don't think Holloway Gaethje is really in the conversation for knockout of all time. I think it'll for sure win knockout of the year. Like I think something crazy will have to happen in 2024 for this knockout to get surpassed. But when I like the thing with knockout of the year and a lot of awards in MMA and combat sports in general is that the criteria is so subjective. With knockout of the years, especially, a lot of people weigh stakes and sort of the moment a lot more than style points. I tend to lean towards style points. And this isn't to criticize the knockout whatsoever. This isn't to say it was a bad knockout. Of course, it's an all time moment, an all time knockout. But I think knockouts like Yair Rodriguez's up back elbow of the Korean Zombie, which was also in the last second of a 25-minute fight. Some people forget that. I think that's still probably number one. I think Joaquin Buckley's spinning, kick of Impa Kasanganai, which went viral back in 2020, I think that's still up there and probably ahead. I think you can probably put Masvidal over Askren in the conversation. Edson Barboza's spinning kick against Terry Etten back in the day. There are a lot of great knockouts. That's the thing. Um, I can't personally put Holloway just like going for broke and swinging wildly and happening to catch Gaethje in the top like 3 or 5. But man, I mean, it's still a freaking iconic, legendary moment. And it is a great knockout. Like it's probably top 10, top 15 all time for me. I just can't quite put it up there with with the very best, because again, it was just the right hand, not to diminish what it meant or anything, or even the style of the knockout, but it wasn't a spinning kick, it wasn't like an up elbow, it wasn't a spinning back fist. So yeah, it's not quite in that discussion for me, but it's very close.
So we got two unfortunate losses for Gaethje and Charles Oliveira. Both who are in the title conversation, both arguably had in case to fight the winner of Makachev and Poirier.
Yeah.
But now with the L's, what is next for them?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think, here's the thing with Justin Gaethje and Charles Oliveira is that, like, they're popular enough fighters that in some ways it's hard for me to see the UFC just saying, "Oh, well, you lost. Well, now you got to defend your spot in the division against like an up and comer," kind of like what Gaethje had to do with Rafael Fiziev, kind of like what Poirier did with Benoit Saint Denis back in March. I'm not sure if UFC will go that route. I think it's possible, or if they'll go more of a fun fight route, like kind of do maybe Poirier loses, you could do a rematch. I mean, Gaethje Poirier 3 is still there. You could do Oliveira Poirier 2. You could do Gaethje Oliveira 2. Like those are also on the table. I kind of feel like just with how the UFC works, they're always about trying to get the up and coming fighters to break through and to see if they can contend with the best of the best. So I kind of have a feeling, as annoying as it will be for Gaethje and Oliveira, I have a feeling they'll have to fight the guys like Mateus Gamrot and maybe even Benoit Saint Denis if he bounces back. I think those are probably the fights we're going to get next for Gaethje and Oliveira. Who exactly? It's hard to say. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of what I'm leaning. In some ways, I hope we get more fun fights. Contender versus contender, veteran versus veteran. That's what Gaethje and Oliveira deserve. I mean, as you said, they were both in line for a title shot. Things happened. Oliveira got hurt. Gaethje wasn't offered it, and then all of a sudden they give Holloway, a fighter not even at lightweight, and Arman Sarukian, an up and comer, a shot. They lose, and now they're here. Like it's a really annoying situation for Gaethje and Oliveira, but that's the name of the game. That's MMA. You got to defend your spot, and they weren't able to. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see what's next for them. But I tend to think that we're going to see, them have to fight some rising prospects or up and comers next.
Are there title opportunities done though? Because just because Gaethje's like, well, I did knock out Dustin Poirier violently as well as he did back for the original BMF belt before this one, right? So do you think that they have to win one more fight, then they'll be back in the title picture, or is it done for either of them?
I don't think it's necessarily done for either of them. I think it could be. Gaethje is what, 35, 36. Oliveira can't be far behind. So they don't have tons and tons of time left, and with their styles and taking damage and getting into sort of wars like they do, that especially, and at a lighter weight class, like time is not on their side, is I guess what I'm trying to say. However, they're popular enough and they're still good enough. Oliveira, went through a split decision with Sarukian, who's now ranked number one in the division. They're still obviously elite fighters. And so, yeah, if they get one win, I think they're right back into in the discussion. And especially if Poirier happens to beat Makachev, which I don't think will happen, but let's say it does, then Gaethje and Oliveira have both beaten the champion. And so that for sure helps their case. Even if it's Islam, I think, one win and you're right back there. If Gaethje loses again, let's say Gaethje fights like a Saint Denis or something, gets knocked out, then it'll be a tougher hill to climb. But right now, I don't think he's in a horrible spot. Like, obviously, it could be a lot better, but it could be worse for guys like Gaethje and Oliveira. So, one win in their back, but they got to get that win.
All right, to close it out on UFC 300 here, Amanda Nunes, is she gonna come out of retirement because of that Kayla Harrison dominant performance?
You're saying is Nunes going to unretire?
Yeah,
That's the
because like
question.
there's like speculation now that
Yeah,
she might after that fight.
right. I think there's a chance. I don't know. It's a tough one for me to say. Amanda Nunes retired because she had nothing left to prove, and because she was starting a family and focus on her family. She has a daughter now, and maybe she wants to have another one. I'm not sure the exact circumstances, but she seemed to be pretty content with stepping away. She seemed to be kind of like, okay, I've had my title reigns. I've done a lot. You know, literally an all-time great, best women's fighter we've ever seen. But if there's one opponent that can get her out of retirement, it's absolutely Kayla Harrison. It's her, former teammate at ATT, I guess current teammate, but not really training partner, more rivals than anything. If there's a challenge that can get her to come back, it is absolutely Kayla Harrison. Harrison lit up, the UFC 300. She was one of the performers of the night, in my opinion, submitting Holly Holm, and she's going to be a big favorite to beat Rockwell Pennington. I think that's the fight the UFC has to make. I think you have to capitalize on this Kayla Harrison moment as quickly as you can, as soon as possible. And I think if they don't throw her into a title fight right away, that's a big mistake. Regardless, I think Kayla will beat probably anybody they put in front of her. And so whether it happens this year or next year, I think we're going to see Kayla Harrison as UFC women's bantamweight champion sooner than later. And at that point, maybe depending on how she frames it, what she says, if she makes it appealing for Amanda, maybe she can get Amanda out of retirement. I personally don't know. Like, it feels 50-50 to me. So I guess that means there's a chance. Like, as I said, if anybody's going to get Amanda Nunes out of retirement, it's Kayla Harrison, and that would be such a big fight. Nunes for so long didn't have these big fights. Like, once she beat sort of Tate and Ronda Rousey and Holly Holm, they just weren't big fights. They didn't feel like big fights. But Kayla Harrison, that feels like a big fight. So myself, I really hope it happens. We'll see. I don't know. I think it could, but I could also see Nunes just saying, "Nope, I'm good. You have your era, I had mine," and that's the way it goes.
So 3 years ago, we saw Conor McGregor's last fight. A month ago, I saw Conor McGregor on Roadhouse, and he looked pretty good. But now he's back at UFC 303. What's your reaction at a welterweight fight against Michael
Um,
Chandler?
yeah, I mean, I guess the reaction is just happy to see Connor back. I think there was a point that a lot of people weren't sure if he was ever going to come back, right? I mean, he was doing movies, he was doing this. Some people see videos online and are a little worried about his mental state and sort of just health in general. Not that we really want to speculate too much without knowing what's going on. But hey, I mean, it's good to see Conor McGregor back. It's good for us, like in the media. I mean, he's still the biggest star in the sport. He's by far the biggest sport we've ever seen. And yeah, things are good. The UFC is better when Conor McGregor is around. I guess my hesitancy, however, would just be the fact that after 3 years away, broken leg, getting up there in age now, has taken some damage in recent fights. It's hard for me to see Conor coming back and really doing much of substance. Like, whether he can beat Michael Chandler or not, we'll see. But is he gonna really beat Islam Makhachev and win a title, or beat Leon Edwards and win the title there? I don't see that happening. I see Conor McGregor as being a guy who had his day and is kind of past his prime now. And so I'm gonna like kind of step back a little bit and not get too excited. Of course, by June 29th, am I gonna be excited to see Connor back? Of course, but I just don't know how much this really means. If this was Connor back in 2016, yeah, bring it on. Absolutely. We have a new contender again. But in 2024, I'm not so sure. I think the sports kind of passed them by a little bit. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to see him back. I just don't know if he can really do much. And that's what with Chandler. That's a tough fight, itself. And if Connor can't beat Chandler, then I don't think he's going to be beating Poirier or Gaethje or anybody else.
Closing the UFC talk on this, going back on the Holloway, I think you mentioned it slightly earlier. Should it be Topuria next, or is Topuria Volkanovski the more likely option still? If Volk waits till like September or something like that.
It'll get really tricky because I think this really will come down to when Topuria wants to fight again and defend his title for the first time. I remember sort of not long after his win over Volk, there was kind of rumblings, rumors, talk about Topuria wanting to sit out till towards the end of the year, like October, November. And at this point, that kind of seems like a possibility. And then it'll get tough because there'll be some people who are saying Volk deserves a rematch. There will be some people who are saying Max deserves it because of this great win. And by then will be the high that we're on from this Max win will kind of be gone. So it'll be a bit more of an even discussion, I suspect. Um, so I guess what I will say is I think Max beating Gaethje for sure increases that argument and the probability of Max being next. I ultimately think it'll probably be Max and Topuria. I think this moment against Gaethje at 300, such a big stage, it was just too big for the UFC not to capitalize on. Does anybody really want to see Topuria and Volk run it back so soon? I don't. I mean, I like Volkanovski, but I think, you know, given that the multiple knockout losses in a row, he has to A, take time off, not rush back in, and he doesn't need to prove himself, but I just don't think an immediate rematch with Taporia is doing himself any favors because I think that probably goes the same way. I think it might be inevitable as it went at UFC 298 in February. And so I think it should be Max and Taporia. I think it probably will be, but depending on how long they wait and sort of timing of everything, then it gets a little tricky. So we'll see. I think they got to do Max and Taporia though. I think that's too good of a fight. And I mean, if they are trying to get into Spain, big arena, maybe a stadium, I don't think there's a bigger fight you can.
All right, Nick, before we get into the boxing side of things, just quick reactions of the upcoming fights there. We, as mentioned to you last time when we brought you on for the first time, you know, we're still on the casual side of things. We're definitely learning a lot, but we're more on the UFC side of things. We know you're an MMA, combat sports in general journalist. So the PFL, it's obviously on the rise a little bit. I know, I think you were looking at the last event, if I'm not mistaken. So for people that are wondering, that are maybe trying to get into MMA, even like us, how is the PFL? How much should we be paying attention to that? And yeah, so on regarding that, or even Bellator if it's still there and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be a PR person for the PFL and say how great it is and why you should be watching it. Also, not to say that you shouldn't be watching it. It's still fun MMA. But I guess my thoughts on the PFL are kind of this: it's a good product. You know, the broadcasts are fine, maybe not quite at the UFC level. The fights are fine. But the reality is the talent just is not on par at all. You know, if you take a look at, you know, each division one by one and the fighters within it, like the UFC, they just have the better fighters. Like, I mean, not that this is some sort of hot take or anything. Everyone knows that, but um, yeah, you're not watching the PFL to see the best lightweight in the world and the best heavyweight in the world. That's just not the reality. However, the PFL still has a lot of great fighters, a lot of good matchups. I mean, this weekend you have the third PFL card of the season. Oh, I'm playing something by accident. I can't probably can't hear that. Anyways, Brendan Loughnane is fighting Pedro Carvalho. That's a fun fight. Andre Koreshkov is on the card. Logan Storley, Bubba Jenkins. You got some good talent. Adam Borch, he's a good featherweight from Bellator to watch out for. So the talent, like, you know, it's good. It's just not great, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make here. So yeah, it's like if you got nothing to do on a Friday night, Thursday night, tune into PFL. But it's just tough. Like, there's so much MMA now, and I'll be honest, it's like it's hard for me to watch much else beyond UFC now, just because UFC's on all the time, and I have to cover it for work, and PFL doesn't take as much priority, you know. But hey, I mean, they're growing. You know, they're signing new talent, new fighters. I mean, Francis Ngannou, having Francis is obviously huge. We'll see if they, you know, ever get him in the PFL smart cage. Um, if they can ever do the Jake Ball thing, that'd be crazy. But yeah, right now, like, it's a solid product. It's just not a great product, I guess.
All right, let's move on to the boxing. It's around the time where all the big fights are about to be, and we already got a head start with the unfortunate knockout of Francis Ngannou over Anthony Joshua. But starting this Saturday, we're let's start off with that. Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney. There was obviously question marks if this fight was going to happen due to Ryan's comments on Twitter and so on and so forth. One, are you surprised the fight is still happening because of that? But and two, since it is looking like it's happening, your prediction and your thoughts on it.
I'm not that surprised it's happening just because of athletic commissions tend to just, like, I know they watch out for fighters and they have to make sure everyone's healthy, but it just seems like, especially on the UFC side of things, I can't speak as much to boxing, but it just seems like there are instances where in hindsight it's like, how did a fighter even get cleared? Like they'll say after a fight, oh yeah, I had staph infection for like the whole week, or oh yeah, I was like throwing up just before the fight because of whatever. It's like how do they even get to the cage or the ring? And so for that reason, I'm not shocked that the New York Athletic Commission didn't like step in and say, "Oh, Ryan Garcia, like you're making some questionable comments on Twitter." So no, I'm not surprised. As far as the fight itself, I think Devin Haney is gonna roll through this guy. I just think Devin Haney is one of the best pound for pound boxers in the world. And, you know that I think that's a fact. I don't think that's opinion. I think he is. Um, and Ryan Garcia isn't. You know, Ryan Garcia is a great boxer. Don't get me wrong. He's a really good up and coming boxer. He's obviously one of the more popular names in the sport. Um, so it's not like Devin Haney is fighting a complete scrub, but Devin Haney is just so good, you know. And I just think he's on a different level. And so exactly how the fight goes, I'm not sure. Whether Haney can get him out of there, you know, before 12 rounds, I'm not sure. But I think it'll be a one-sided performance, whether it's a knockout or a decision. I think Devin Haney is going to show that, yeah, he is on a different level. And yeah, I don't think it'll be that competitive, to be honest.
Um, are we going to be watching Rocky Balboa when Mike Tyson faces Jake Paul? How like Rocky Balboa comes back at age 60 to face the current champ.
We might be. I don't know what to make of that fight. It's gonna be interesting, I guess. Like, I it really comes down to like whether this is a pro fight, whether it's an exhibition. Because like if it's an
I think they announced
exhibition,
exhibition. I think it's announced as an exhibition right
I
now.
think it was kind of announced, but I know Jake Paul's still saying like we're trying to get it, you know, approved by the commission, which I don't think will happen. I don't know what to make of this fight. Jake Paul could win, Mike Tyson could win. It could be a draw, it could be a split decision, it could be a no contest, it could be anything, and I won't be surprised. I'll probably be watching, but I really don't know what to make of this fight. I'll leave it there. I just don't. Mike Tyson is 60 and Jake Paul is 27. I don't know. Your
That's
guess,
I
crazy.
think
your guess is as good as mine.
yeah,
Or he's
I
58.
think
He's not 60, but either
yeah.
way.
But yeah, I think people are gonna tune in, but just because it's Mike Tyson mainly, and then I think they saved themselves a little bit because today they literally announced
Yep.
Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano too, which the first fight of those people that have watched, we were one of them, two of them at least I watched, and it was one of the best fights I've seen in boxing, not just women boxing, but boxing in general. So at least they saved themselves a little bit by giving them a huge platform as the co-main event as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great fight. And that's one that boxing fan like having Taylor Serrano on the undercard is really actually brilliant because it's gonna get boxing purists, whether it's you're talking media or fans watching that event. Just before, you know, with Paul and Tyson, I'm not sure every boxing fanatic was gonna tune in because it's like, yeah, it's some washed up heavyweight champion fighting a YouTuber. Why am I gonna watch this? But now you have two of the best women's boxers in the world fighting in a rematch of one of the best women's boxing matches of all time. And so I think that was a brilliant move to have that co-headlining co-headlining underneath Paul Tyson. And as far as the fight itself, I'm excited. I watched that first one back at MSG. I wasn't there, but I watched it, and yeah, it was a freaking amazing fight. And so I'm excited for the rematch. Serrano has looked really good in the past couple of years. Taylor obviously had that one loss up a weight class to Chantel Cameron. Got avenged that loss last year. So both ladies are riding high, and I think this rematch is going to be a huge fight and a great fight again.
We have a lot of good, fun up and coming fights, like I mentioned before. Which ones are you looking forward to? Examples are Fury Usyk is obviously a big one. After that Fury performance against Nagano, he knows what he needs to do. You got Masvidal and Diaz, former UFC guys, fighting in the boxing ring as well. You got Canelo back. You got Artem Tribiev versus Bivol. Deontay Wilder just announced it might be his last dance against Jay Lee Zhang as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, what are you looking forward to? Which fights are you looking forward to?
I think Fury Usyk is probably still number one just because of how big it is. Heavyweight undisputed title fight. Tyson Fury is always must watch television. But in terms of like a more hardcore fans fight and what might be like the most exciting, Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol. I'm really excited for that one. I haven't watched these guys too much. I think I've probably only seen them both once or twice, but I was impressed both times. Like whenever I watch these guys, I'm impressed, and they're two of the best, and fighting for the undisputed light heavyweight title. Obviously, a historic matchup in that regard. And yeah, I'm excited to see who wins because I really don't know. I mean, both guys you could say are like 1A, 1B, and now we're gonna find out who the real, you know, BMF at the boxing light heavyweight is. And yeah, I'm excited for that one.
All right, Nick, we appreciate the time once again. But as always, we'll let you promo any stuff coming up for you. Where can people find you? Yeah, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you guys for having me back on. I appreciate it. Always fun. And everyone listening can find me on Twitter at Nick Baldwin MMA, and they can find all my work at the Score, either just the website or the Score app. And yeah, had a lot of stuff out last week and sort of into this week, previewing and recapping UFC 300. So yeah, check out all that. And thanks again for having me on.
Best of luck to your Winnipeg Jets as well as the Stanley Cup
Well,
playoffs are underway.
and likewise, maybe we'll see each other in the Western Conference Final if we're lucky.
Hopefully so. Yeah.
Hopefully, yeah.
All right. Once again, Nick, appreciate you. And for everybody else, his links will be linked down below. So make sure you guys check out Nick's work on the Score and his Twitter. And other than that, we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Peace.